We supposedly have freedom of speech, but not if you say something that offends someone. We supposedly have freedom of religion, but not if your bakery chooses not to participate in your wedding. We supposedly have the right to be secure in our persons, papers, and homes from unreasonable searches and seizures, but the horse has long since left that barn. Are we really free anymore? It's a great question. Well, we are and we aren't. We are more free than the communists, and we were less free than we used to be. Cheryl told me, just stuck her head in the door. Cheryl, we had an entire little homage to you earlier when we read your question first, so be sure to go back there and watch it on YouTube again and again and again and again and again. And that's really what it is, right? It's like it is a spectrum, a freedom spectrum. You have a case of real freedom, which is the freedom that the Founding Fathers handed down to us. You have utter tyranny, where no one can do anything. And in between these two things, you have where we are. Do we still have freedom of speech? Yes, we do. And the fact that it offends people is just too bad for them. In the real world, they can be as offended as they want to, and it doesn't have any effect. It's only on college campuses where they've got so much extortion leverage over the, well, it's not extortion leverage over the university staff. The university staff agrees to things like safe spaces and eliminating conservatives from campus and restricting free speech. It's not because they've been pushed into it. It's because the faculty believes that themselves. But you pay to go to a university, and it's private property in most cases. And if it's state property, you get the idea, right? It's a little universe where they can limit free speech, but it has not affected my ability to speak freely, or yours either, politically. And let's not forget, and we talk about things like censorship and free speech, used to get this all the time back at Eject. When I'd run into somebody particularly nasty in the comment section, I'd give them a lot of rope. I really would. I don't give anybody nearly that much rope anymore, because they just come in and hijack the comment section on a particular thread. But in any event, if somebody got really, really nasty and offensive, I would block them. And they would say, "You're depriving me of my right to free speech." I said, "On the contrary, I am not. You have the right to say whatever you want to. What I'm depriving you of is I am depriving you of the audience that I have earned. I'm depriving you of the audience of eyeballs that I have earned. You can say whatever you want to someplace else. I'm not stopping you from speaking. I'm stopping you from speaking on my private property, which is my website. I have that right. If a protester wants to stand in a public area and talk about, scream about Greenpeace or scream about Planned Parenthood, whatever they want to do, they have a right to do that. They don't have a right to do it in my living room, and I don't have to listen to them in my living room. And you can make the case that if I have to listen to them every day outside on my street, then they have in fact invaded my house. So censorship and stuff like that really only applies to, and intimidation and, all of the shaming and all the rest of it, only really applies to, does the censoring body have the coercive power of state violence behind them? Can they, if you call the cops, whose side are the cops going to be on? So we're certainly still have free speech. No one has been legally prevented from speaking because it offended people. Now, on the second point, we are much worse off. This business of forcing them to, provide services for people that they don't particularly care for, and then fining them six-figure fines if they didn't, is repugnant, especially when it's a religious principle. I mean, this whole thing with the bakery and stuff is just, it's catastrophic. If we had a court and a Congress, if we'd had a Congress, we would have, and we do, by the way, and we do, right? We do have a Congress. It's not like if we had a Republican majority someday. We have a Republican majority someday. We have one right now. And if we did, we would simply throw this nonsense out. And here's how you can throw this nonsense out, by the way, and most people do not realize this, but it's absolutely true. Absolutely true. All the powers that the Congress and these charlatans in the House and the Senate have stolen, with things like the Commerce Clause, that's one thing. But there is a profound power that they not only have not stolen, but they haven't used, and that is the power for Congress to simply dismiss any court in the country, including the Supreme Court. Now you're done. What? Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals? Now you're done. What do you mean we're done? You're dissolved. We're going to replace you. We understand that we need judges in that area, but this nonsense of yours has just gone on far enough. You're dissolved. Problem solved. The founders never envisioned the Supreme Court as being able to overturn the will of the people. The founders never envisioned the Supreme Court as ruling on whether a law was constitutional. If the law was voted on by members of Congress and voted on and fairly tallied the votes, then the law was legal and constitutional by definition. It came from the House of Representatives, approved by the Senate. It's law. The court doesn't have a right to say that's not law. If you want to change what the law is doing, if you don't like segregation, for example, it's not the court's job, it's Congress's job to change. That's why you rotate the Congress every 2 years, at least the House every 2 years. And you rotate the Senate every 6 because you want some things you want quick rotation on in order to facilitate change, and sometimes you want slow rotation because sometimes it's good to resist change. It's a nice balance. But this whole thing with them striking down laws is ridiculous. Not only does Congress have the power to dismiss one of these circuit courts, and I'm quite sure the Supreme Court as well. What's interesting about the Supreme Court is everybody assumes, well, 9 justices and a Chief Justice. Doesn't say 9 justices anywhere in the Constitution. Doesn't specify how many judges or justices there are on the Supreme Court. It simply specifies that there must be one Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. So if Robertson goes to work, as far as the Constitution is concerned, by himself, he's good to go. Roosevelt, FDR, found himself being constrained in his tyrannical desire to rewrite society in his own image in the 30s, and the court basically said none of this stuff is constitutional. You can't pass any of this New Deal stuff. And what Roosevelt said was, Roosevelt understood the Constitution to this degree, understood it well enough to destroy it in many places. Roosevelt basically said, look, okay, so what is it? What's the vote? 6-3 against me? Okay, fine. So there's 9 justices, and I'll appoint another 6. I'll appoint 6 more justices to the Supreme Court, and then the vote will be 9-12 in my favor. I'll just pack the court with as many liberals as I want to. And by the way, boy, that's a tough name. RQ Tech 86 over there said he disagrees with me. He says if a law is passed that says the First Amendment is repealed, it's not constitutional. You're absolutely right. I was wrong about that. I think you can say that any law that's passed by Congress that is not in violation of natural law, the Bill of Rights, they can do. But I've said 100 times in public that you could have somebody repeal the First Amendment, or proposed bill repealing the First Amendment could be ratified by all of the states and could be voted on by the House, and they could get 435 votes to nothing, and the Senate could vote for it 100 to nothing, and the President could sign it into law, and it wouldn't matter because it's not law. It's a natural right, and you can't have it taken away from you. You can just have a government that tries to. So let me just correct myself there. I was really talking about a little more mundane kind of things, but I like being pointed out when I'm wrong, and I was wrong about that. But in any event, because it doesn't happen very often, I think the last time was 1968, somewhere in there. This business about the court is the founders would have been mortified. And then the right to be secure in our persons, papers, and homes from unreasonable searches and seizures. Look, papers, persons, and homes. People say papers. Well, your papers are secure. It's just your emails that aren't secure. This is the same ridiculous, absurd argument that these morons try to apply to the Second Amendment, saying, well, that only applies to single-shot flintlock muskets. No, it doesn't say the right of the people to bear muskets shall not be infringed. It says to bear arms. And the reason they said arms was because they figured that if this republic lasts for a while, there's going to be more sophisticated weapons, and those are what you can have. So when people say, well, your papers are secure, but your email's not, my emails are my papers. My emails are my private correspondence. They're protected. The same people, so there are people, I'm not the first person to come up with this, I sure wish I wasn't the last, but you will see people on Bill Maher's show, let's say, who are saying that the First Amendment only applies to flintlock muskets. And they're telling people this on television, broadcast around the world by geostationary satellites, to which obviously the response is, well, if the Second Amendment only applies to muskets, then the First Amendment only applies to pen and parchment, or as loud as your voice can carry if you ring a bell in the center of a town hall. Your First Amendment doesn't extend to what you say on TV. It's the founders never envisioned TV or the internet. You don't have a First Amendment on the internet or television. You have a First Amendment to write whatever you want to, and handwrite it, by the way. You don't get to print it. But if you do, you get to print it on a Franklin kind of printer. You can't just run off a million of them, because the founders never could have foreseen this internet revolution or this satellite revolution, television revolution, or whatever. That's true. They could not have foreseen it. But they did foresee the immortal qualities of the fact that your right to free speech is inviolate regardless of what the medium is. It doesn't matter. You have a right to free speech. You have a right to protect yourself. It doesn't matter what the weapon is. It doesn't matter. It's not protecting the weapon. It's protecting the right. You have a right to not be searched in your papers or your private correspondence. They can call it papers. They can call it email. They can call it end mail for neutrino mail. It doesn't matter. It's your communications, and they don't have a right to dig into them. And everybody knows what this means. So anyway, yeah, Dave, the bad news is we're not as free as we used to be. The good news is we're still way, way, way past the center mark towards freedom, and that's why people like us run around with our hair on fire. It's not that things are as horrible now as they could be. We just don't like the trend lines because we know where they lead.